This is the Dzogchen Sunday Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. Come, let us explore the best emptiness practices for overthinking minds, followed by meditating like a Jedi. This morning's lesson is drawn from the meditation classic, Spaciousness of Vajrasattva, composed oh so many centuries ago by Vajra, in a land that at one time was known as Odiyana, but today is known as the Swat Valley of Pakistan. So just as an Oreo cookie has one cookie and then some icing and then another cookie, my intention is to first read this, then explain this, then read it a final time. Real meditation is effortless letting go in the true condition. This true condition never appears to us as something which can be seen. Striving to grasp it, we prevent the recognition of its true nature. Whoops, I think I hit the wrong button. Let's hit this button here. There we go. So I'd like to return to the outline. In order for the idea of patriarchal bullies to make sense, let's skedaddle to a visual aid. Let's look at this circumstance through the lens of archaeology and anthropology. There is great evidence to suggest that about 300,000 years ago, our Paleolithic ancestors enjoyed a culture that promoted being flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. Perhaps this is where the legend of the Garden of Eden came from. Because after about 290,000 years, during the Neolithic Revolution, humanity experienced the advent of proto-capitalism, which turned our culture on its head and instead encouraged humans to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. So in other words, we went from groovy, what was that Jedi's name? Groovy Qui-Gon Jinn to grumpy Mace Windu. We went from the groovy dude to grumpy Big Lebowski. That still chases us today. I live in the United Corporations of America in Southern California, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, I too was raised to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. Through extraordinary good fortune, I began to be drawn in the opposite direction. Sturgeon's law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks. So at least 10% of humanity is drawn to being more flexible, loving, rational, laid-back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. Einstein warned us that great spirits encounter violent opposition from, let me rephrase this, great spirits encounter violent opposition from lesser minds. Whenever a great luminary appears, such as the Buddha, be he real or merely archetypical, there will always be members of patriarchy who will try to infiltrate and insinuate themselves into positions of power and prestige. We see this happening in many traditions around the world. And so we see that Buddhism has become divided between proto-Buddhism, which is quite beautiful, and institutional Buddhism, which makes me think of the Imperial March from Star Wars, or The Empire Strikes Back. So what we're talking here is a degree of villainy which is just irrational and cartoonish. It would be funny if it wasn't so destructive. These are the people, the rigid and fearful and superstitious and controlling and elitist and cryptic and competitive and cruel people who will victim blame and tell people the only reason they're suffering is because they have failed to understand, no less master, the philosophy of emptiness. We'll take this a step further. These are the villains who will be cruel to other people, who will practice sexism and ableism and racism. And when someone says this is unacceptable, they will point to them and say, the only reason you have a problem with this sexism or ableism or racism is because you have failed to master the philosophies and techniques of emptiness. Classic narcissistic behavior, to carelessly cut someone and then curse them for bleeding. This is not unique to Buddhism. This paradox is universal for all humanity. Let's return now to the outline. So we discussed the lie of the panacea, that if you'd only understood emptiness, well, who could forget Empire Strikes Back, where Darth Vader tries to evangelize his son, if you only knew the power of the dark side. So a lot of a lot of people say the same thing. A lot of patriarchy says the same thing. If you only knew the power of Jesus Christ, if you only knew the power of Heavenly Father, if you only knew the power of Jehovah, if you only knew the power of the Holy Trinity, if you only knew the power of shunyata or emptiness, if you only knew the power of anatta or no self, then you would not suffer at all ever. But that is not what the Buddha taught. The seventh fold of the Buddha's eightfold path is mindfulness. Similarly, the first enlightenment factor is also mindfulness. So I guess we can conclude from that, from the perspective of proto-Buddhism, mindfulness is important. Any tool that suppresses our perception of stress is therefore antithetical to the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness. As some poo-poo head tells you that the only reason you're noticing social injustice or interpersonal injustice or any type of cruelty is because you have failed to understand emptiness, we know that person has much more authority than they do wisdom. Sadly, this is not uncommon. What is the liberation that the Buddha offers us? It is not liberation from the presence of suffering. It is liberation from the tyranny of suffering. The ability to perceive, emote, intend, reason, recall, and imagine all the vicissitudes of life without our choices or our utterances or our deeds being controlled by them. Consider, if you will, the Disney movie Pinocchio. I have no strings to hold me down, to make me laugh or make me frown. I once had strings, but now you see there are no strings on me. So, the Buddhist techniques help us cut the marionette strings that control our choices, utterances, and deeds, but they are still there. We still experience the full spectrum of human sight, sound, sensation, flavor, scent, emotion, intention, thought, memory, and imagining. And once again, if someone tells you otherwise, they are either sincerely mistaken or cynically deceptive and manipulative and cruel. The quick path to understanding emptiness requires neither superstition nor pseudo-intellectualism. In my journey, on my journey in this life, I've encountered teachers who advised both superstition and pseudo-intellectualism. Memorize this root text, pore over this commentary, dedicate the next 20 years of your life to performing mental gymnastics. That sounds great until you remember that in the second to the final passage of the Buddha's discourse on the four bases of mindfulness, he explained that one could master his path in as little as 7 days. You can't earn a PhD in 7 days, but you can practice the easy techniques of the Buddha's essential path. So I will share that with you right now with the expectation that the word emptiness is just a metaphor. Humans are funny. Most complex life forms on this planet come from a common ancestor who turned their perceptions into memories and then fantasies. And as such, all of us, our evolution has wired all of us to think symbolically. Therefore, it should come as a little surprise that the ideas of letting go in time became explained as similes and then metaphors. And then some people were so rigid and so literal minded that they began looking at metaphors not as figures of speech, but as literal statements. And then Buddhism went off the rails to wackadoodleville. Let's see if we can't fix that. So we're going to do this in 2 parts. We're going to explore the mechanics of meditation through the lens of neuroscience. And then we're going to put on our English teacher hat and see if we can't view it through the lens of an English teacher. So once again, we're going to switch pages and we're going to go return to the visual aids. Here we go. The seventh fold of the Buddha's eightfold path is mindfulness. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we've evolved to automatically access the middle bit of our spinal cord, the middle bit of our autonomic nervous system, known as our sympathetic nervous system, which has evolved to help us to vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly notice all mind's antics of perception, emotion, intention, cognition, recollection, and imagination. All of them. From the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. What is the most efficient way for us to watch the antics of mind? Simply, all we got to do is silently and mentally recite the verb watch every time we feel our chest swell with breath. What then do we do with that which we noticed? We meditate. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we have evolved to automatically access a very specific part of our spinal cord, a very specific part of our autonomic nervous system, specifically both the attic and the basement. These two regions, these two ends of the exact same spinal cord are known as our parasympathetic nervous system. And they have evolved to help us to relax to such a degree that that which we noticed during our previous inhalation could fleetingly feel less stressful, less permanent, less defining, and even as non-graspable as a vast empty void. Now let's put on an English teacher hat. Any good English teacher will remind us that a simile is only as useful as it is relatable. So we have to ask the question, what? What is a real-world example of a non-graspable, vast empty void? How about the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although could look tantalizing to the eye, could feel non-graspable to the hand? And so we see that emptiness is nothing mystical or magical. It is just a label. It's just a metaphor we use to label a fleeting and temporary and compelling facet of experience. What is the most efficient way for us to rest in the aspect of mind that can fleetingly feel non-graspable? To do that, all we got to do is silently and mentally recite the verb rest. Each time we feel our chest subtly sink, as gently we exhale. And thus we can see. Let's return now to the outline. And thus we could see that emptiness is latent within each exhalation. For the last 10,000 years, our species has been conditioned to be so rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel that we can't help but actively compete against our own autonomic nervous system, even though doing so triggers our amygdala, which is the seat of both anxiety and aggression. However, we can take a break from that habit by playing with the verb watch and the verb rest silently and mentally in harmony with our inhalations and exhalations. This is why the great, what's his name? Prahevajra taught that enlightenment, it's easy. It's so easy that it's difficult. For those of us who have been trained to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, it can be difficult to say, I don't have to fight anymore. I don't have to make my body and brain do certain things. They already are doing those things. All I got to do is step out of the way and align my intention with the wiring of my autonomic nervous system. And the only thing I need to do that are the verbs watch and rest. As promised, I'd like to return to the root text for final recitation so that we can now review it within the context of the explanation. Real meditation is effortless letting go in the true condition. True condition, let me put this here real quick. True condition of emptiness. This true condition never appeared to us as something which can be seen. We cannot force it. Though try we might, we cannot force it. Striving to grasp it, we prevent the recognition of its true nature. But we can passively notice and viscerally relax. You have taken your first step into a much larger world. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. For meditate like a Jedi is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. For the remainder of this morning's live stream, let us watch and rest in harmony with our inhalations and our exhalations. The free fall, that is meditation, could feel jarring to our rigid and controlling tendencies. A useful workaround could be playing with a variation of Bengali crease counting. Let us touch the tip of our left thumb to the lowest set of creases on its left little finger, thus keeping track of our first collection of our first set, that's the right noun, our first set of 16 inhalations. For the time being, let us rest this left hand palms up in our lap. Every time we silently and mentally recite the verb watch as we inhale, we could advance our right thumb up the creases and tips of each of its fingers. Let us do this right now together as a team, beginning with the right little finger. Behold, we have run out of places upon which to rest the tip of our right thumb. We could therefore return our attention to our left thumb and advance it to its second set of creases upon its little finger. And now we get the basic idea of how we could use our left hand to count 16 sets of 16 inhalations each. Counting 16 inhalations could take a little bit more than 1 minute. Counting 16 sets of 16 inhalations each could take a little bit more than 20 minutes. As we begin gathering our first collection of 20 minutes, we could rest the great knuckle at the bottom of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap. As we begin to gather our second collection of 20 minutes, we could rest the middle knuckle of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap. And you guessed it, as we begin to gather our third collection of 20 minutes, we could rest the third knuckle of our right middle finger upon the tip of our left middle finger, palms up in our lap. Overwhelmed? The antidote is repetition. Come meditate with me once every 12 hours, and within a week or two, you too could master the Buddha's path. There are many elitists who insist that one cannot be considered a true meditator unless one has mastered the full lotus position. That sounds great, until you remember that the Buddha never taught that, and that the most ancient Buddhist statuary depicts the Buddha sitting not in the full lotus position, but in the quarter lotus position, wherein the shins are stacked like the top and bottom of an Oreo cookie. The key to sitting, in which position should we sit? In a position that we find comfortable and sustainable, wherein we can remain relatively pain-free for 15 to 20 minutes, and wherein during our inhalations we can lengthen our spine. There is no shame in adjusting your legs every 15 to 20 minutes. You know, there is no advantage to cultivating arthritis. The moment you have a specific question about the philosophies or techniques of Taoism, Buddhism, Tantra, Dzogchen, Zen, or Mahamudra. Do not hesitate to type your question in great detail in the chat window, for I tend to check for questions about every 5 minutes or so. In about 2.33 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's second lesson, followed by meditating like a Jedi. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.